Good.
Everyone is in, Susan. Take it away.
Okay. We are going to get started then. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Breakfast Club. As noted in the email yesterday, I'm not going to be on the camera at all. I'm fighting COVID and it's kicking my butt this morning, so I'm staying off camera. On Friday, July 15th, just 4 days before the primary, our guest at the Silver Spring Tasty Diner in person is our very own Senator Chris Van Hollen. I hope to see lots of you there that day. Chris asked that we come to the Tasty Diner. He really wanted to meet us there. So it's a Friday, not a Monday, and I look forward to seeing all of you there. So today we are fortunate to have our Attorney General candidates. Each will have 30 minutes to speak. The first candidate will be former Lieutenant Governor and Congressman Anthony Brown. Mr. Brown, you are on.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Thumbs up. Good. Great. First of all, thank District 18, the Breakfast Club. I wish we could have met at the diner. I've always enjoyed, coming and visiting from time to time and engaging in thoughtful conversation around issues that are important to everyone. But the next best thing for the last 2 years has been virtual. So I'm glad to be with you this morning. And Susan, certainly, I hope you have a speedy recovery from your bout with COVID. I am running for Attorney General. Brian Frosch, as we all know, announced his retirement. He's got big shoes to fill. And I've announced that I will not be seeking re-election to the United States Congress. Many of you know me mostly from my time in Annapolis as a member of the House of Delegates, as your Lieutenant Governor, and more recently now 6 terms, 6 years in Congress. And many of you also know I've served 30 years in the United States Army and Army Reserve, both as an aviator and a JAG officer. But I've got nearly 30 years as an attorney, where I've been able to take my education, my experience, my training, my passion, first in service to my clients, and then more recently, certainly when I became a full-time public official as Lieutenant Governor in service to the people of Maryland. And through all of those experiences, it is clear to me that Marylanders deserve, they demand an Attorney General who will be a champion for change, a reform-oriented public official, someone who does not accept the status quo. And I think we saw that on full display with Brian Frosch, who really leaned into the role, every aspect of the office of Attorney General. Maryland has made a lot of progress over the years, and many on this Zoom are responsible for that, whether it's our investments in the blueprint for Maryland's future, whether it's what we did in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, one of, I think, the only state that, passed any meaningful police accountability measures. Still more work to be done. I think 10 years ago, after the massacre at Sandy Hook, the only state, along with Connecticut, to make some meaningful progress when it comes to gun safety regulations. But I believe that too many barriers exist for too many Marylanders. And we see that in education. We see that in the environment, environmental justice. We see that in housing. We see it in healthcare. We see it in the workplace, in policing, and the criminal justice system, a system that over-incarcerates Black men at the highest rate in the nation, a system that has the highest percentage of Black men behind bars than any other state in the nation, a system where our recidivism rate is twice that of Virginia, and a system where I believe we are turning far too many children into hardened criminals instead of getting them back on a path of productivity and successful lives. So I'm running for Attorney General to eliminate those barriers, to make government work again, and to fight for the changes, as I've done on Capitol Hill and in Annapolis, that will protect every person and empower every community. I recognize that the Attorney General represents the state, but works for the people. The Attorney General is the people's lawyer. And as that, I'm going to investigate problems and issues. I'll advocate for the necessary legislative and policy changes, and I'll set enforcement priorities that are consistent with the people of Maryland. So whether we're tackling the rise in crime or public safety, whether we're addressing climate change or environmental justice, dealing with affordable healthcare or quality healthcare and affordable housing issues, or defending against attacks on women's reproductive freedoms, because I do believe those attacks are coming. They're already here in Maryland. Whether we're protecting consumers or seniors or veterans, immigrants or refugees, or even voting rights, workers' rights, and the rights of the LGBTQIA+ community. And even when we hold ourselves, all public officials, including law enforcement, accountable, I'm going to fight for the people, fight for fairness, and everything I do will be through a lens of equity and inclusion. So thanks for giving me an opportunity to sort of present sort of a vision and a little bit about my background. And I look forward to the remainder of the time that we have together and the conversations and issues that you raise.
First question, what is your approach to criminal justice reform?
Thank you. The Attorney General plays an important role when it comes to criminal justice reform, when it comes to public safety. On the criminal justice reform, I start on the front end with juvenile justice system, which is broken. Evidence shows that Maryland is over incarcerating young people. I support the legislation that was presented in Annapolis, but did not pass this year, where unless it's a gun-related misdemeanor, we should not be incarcerating our children. We should be investing more in diversionary programs, getting them the mental health services they need, the educational services they need, the services that their families need. I support the General Assembly in not automatically moving to adult court children. We find that it's disproportionately Black children, and they don't have the kinds of services in adult court that they and their families need. So I supported that move as well. Our juvenile justice system needs reform. And when it comes to the back end, we need to invest more in our returning citizens. And that's in mental health, mental and behavioral health services, other health services, housing services, employment services. It seems counterintuitive, particularly for those who just really want to just incarcerate. But it's actually less expensive to make those investments in returning citizens, providing them the supports to rejoin their families in the community, than to have them reoffend within the next 3 years and return to jail. It's expensive, both for the individual, but even for taxpayers to keep people or to incarcerate people. So we should be making that investment up front. I know the General Assembly did look at greater investments in reform in our parole and probation system. I would certainly support that as the Attorney General. On Capitol Hill, I supported the First Step Act, which has a number of those provisions at the federal level. So those are some of the things that I would do on the criminal justice reform side.
Okay, as a follow-up to the mass rally in DC on Saturday, what are your plans to end gun violence? And add in there, I know you have talked on the trail about your experience in the state legislature and that you are going to be active working in the legislature. So the second part would be then, what do you see as the next gun safety legislation that is needed in Maryland?
Absolutely. And there was a big rally in Washington, D.C., not as big, but still a good turnout in Annapolis. I was in Annapolis on Saturday at the March for Our Lives rally, well attended, and had an opportunity to speak. There are a number of things that I've leaned into to help pass legislation to take guns off of our street, recognizing that no single thing that we do will eliminate gun violence, but everything we do will reduce gun violence. When I was in the General Assembly and my cousin Kathy was shot and killed by her estranged boyfriend in Germantown, who he in turn was shot and killed by two Montgomery County police officers. I worked with the domestic violence advocates, and after 10 years of trying, we finally got law passed in Maryland where judges can now, when they issue not only a permanent but a temporary protective order, not only does that person go on the no-buy list, but judges can order, and they've been using this law effectively, order that abuser to surrender their firearms. I was in Annapolis this year, standing side by side with Brian Frosch as we testified, both of us testified, to ban ghost guns in Maryland. We're seeing an increased number of ghost guns involved in gun-related crimes in Maryland around the country. So we need to make sure that they're registered, that they're identified, and if not, they're unlawful. We've got similar legislation on Capitol Hill that did make it last week out of the House. I was glad that in Maryland we got that passed. I'm also pleased that Maryland banned bump stocks. We got that out of the House last week, and it's now in the Senate. The final thing I want to mention in terms of the efforts that I've led, as many of you know, I was the lead sponsor on the bill to raise the age in order to purchase a semi-automatic rifle. Look, I'm with most of you, if not all of you. I want to see the all-out ban of semi-automatic rifles, including semi-automatic shotguns. I believe that if we can't do the all-out ban, then we need to raise the age to 21 to put it on parity with what the age requirement to purchase a handgun by a federally registered dealer. That bill, that provision that I introduced 4 years ago after the Parkland, Florida shooting, a massacre, finally got a vote on the House floor and is in the Senate. Right now, the Senate may not pass that, but what I think they will pass is to have a more extensive background check for people under 21, opening up their mental health records and their juvenile records. So while I'd like to see the complete ban on assault weapons, while I'd like to see us raise the age, that's a good step forward. And finally, in Maryland, because the question is, what's the next step? You know, in 2013, we did do some good things, right? A fingerprint-based background check, banning large capacity magazines, restricting the number or the types of semi-automatic weapons, but we did not ban all assault weapons in Maryland. That's the next step in Maryland. So as Attorney General, just as Brian Frosch was an advocate in Annapolis, Brian relied on his experience, his extensive experience in Annapolis, the kind of experience that I had spending 16 years in Annapolis, to work with the General Assembly. The next step is to ban all assault weapons in Maryland, and that's what I'll be fighting for.
Okay, next question. Questions have been raised about your expenditure of your congressional/federal funds in your campaign for a state office. How do you respond to this?
Okay, first, I do want to point out that my federal and state campaign expenditures and receipts, they all comply with federal and state requirements. All of my expenses from my federal account, right, as Anthony Brown for Congress, that have been used after October 25th when I announced my candidacy for Attorney General, all of those have been for the winding down of the federal committee and had nothing to do with the state race. I think the reason why the questions have been raised is because, rarely do we have in Maryland a sitting member of Congress who's running for state office. In fact, and I've been in Maryland for 30 years. The only time that I've seen that was 20 years ago when Bob Ehrlich, who was then a member of Congress, ran for governor. And while it raises questions, I think it's because the federal campaign account continues to spend money on the wind down while the candidate account, right, the Friends of Anthony Brown running for Attorney General, is running a state office. The FEC allows for the federal campaigns to wind down their activities, and typically that's for a 6-month period. And during that period, the FEC allows for expenses such as payroll, office, and other overhead expenses. Also transfers to other candidates, not to my candidacy as Attorney General, or party accounts, as well as expenses that are related to a member's official duties. And as you would see when you review my filings, both with the FEC and with the Maryland State Board of Elections, my expenses are consistent with that. And tomorrow is when all state and local campaigns in Maryland will be filed. Those will be our next reports with the State Board of Elections, and you'll be able to see that my state campaign paid all of the expenses for payroll, office, and overhead, and all campaign activities for my AG race from the state account. I would say, because I'm always asked about lessons learned, whether it was the campaign in 2014 or this campaign. I think that Maryland should consider adopting the FEC quarterly reporting period so that both federal and state campaign reports can be looked at side by side. And then these questions can be answered without having to wait until the state report is filed months after the federal reports. See, Maryland state law only requires one report for all of last year, which was due in January, and then not again until June, in fact, tomorrow, whereas the FEC requires 3 months reporting. And I think that Maryland should adopt that practice, particularly when we're in the election year. And the other thing I would say is that, you'll see that my state reporting, which comes out tomorrow, is consistent with every candidate, not only in this campaign for Attorney General, but all other statewide campaigns. And, this is completely normal practice for campaigns, which is why, not a single Maryland reporter, although they've made inquiries because they too have had the questions, like the Baltimore Sun inquired and felt like this story didn't meet their standards, which is why, no local news outlet has written on this, because it raises a question, but the answers are that it's consistent with state and federal law.
Okay. Attorney General Brian Frosh worked with attorney generals from other states to advance collective suits to advance Maryland needs. Do you plan such joint efforts? And do you have any thoughts about which issues you might work with in such a manner?
Definitely. And Brian has done an extraordinary job. And I should add that one of the authorities or the vehicles that gave Brian the ability to do that was the Maryland Defense Act, which was passed in 2017. Again, what happened was Brian relied on his legislative experience, his advocacy experience in Annapolis, to work with the General Assembly when Donald Trump was elected to pass the Maryland Defense Act. And the Maryland Defense Act gives the Attorney General's office the authority to either bring lawsuits or to join lawsuits. And Brian has done that successfully when any one of 8 categories of actions are taken by the federal government that harm Marylanders. So Brian has either filed or joined lawsuits against the Environmental Protection Agency when they tried to roll back some of the clean air and clean water standards that we rely on to protect Maryland's environment and our public health. Brian joined actions with other attorneys general to sue the Department of Labor when they tried to roll back labor standards that protect Maryland's workforce. Brian also, after Congress passed a lot of that pandemic relief that was going to our schools, and I was proud to be a part of that as a member of Congress, under Betsy DeVos, she tried to dilute the formula, which would have hurt Maryland schools. Brian Frost brought a lawsuit against the Department of Education and Betsy DeVos as well. Those are the types of lawsuits that I would bring to protect the interests of Marylanders. And you don't bring them alone. You join other states' attorneys, other attorneys generals to combine those resources to be effective when you go into federal court. Sometimes that court will be in Maryland. Sometimes I'll join a lawsuit in another state. And Brian also brought the Emoluments Clause case, which many of us know about. It's since been dismissed as moot because Trump is no longer in office. But I think that was an important case to bring. So I'll bring those types of cases. I'll also join with attorneys general, Republicans and Democrats on litigation like the opioid litigation, which resulted in a huge settlement for Marylanders. I'll join other attorneys general in bringing on actions against fossil fuel companies, the large oil companies, so that they compensate Marylanders for the harms that they're doing because of the products and the commodities they sell. We remember the tobacco litigation. Maryland's Attorney General years ago joined with other attorneys general. I have experience with tobacco litigation and tobacco settlement in my private practice. I've had in my private practice large commercial litigation, multi-party litigation, class action litigations, all the types of actions that the Attorney General's office participates in, either by bringing actions or joining actions. So I look forward to joining other attorneys generals to protect the interests of Marylanders as the next Attorney General.
I was muted, I'm sorry. You mentioned several topics in your introduction, but do you have a top priority when you walk into the office if you become Attorney General?
Sure. And, you know, Maryland, we all know, is the fourth most diverse state in the nation. The census of 2020 showed that, you know, we're the most diverse state east of the Mississippi, the fourth most in the country behind California, Nevada, and Hawaii. And I think the challenges that we face and the issues that the Attorney General's office will have to confront are as numerous as we are diverse as a state. Having said that, I think there are at least 3 or 4 areas where I want to focus right out of the gate as Attorney General. One, we already discussed, is public safety and the criminal justice system. Both on the investigation and prosecution side, I want to step up the size of the organized crime unit. We talked about policies that I want to that I'll be fighting for as well. The second piece is environmental protection. There's an environmental crimes unit. Believe it or not, there are only 2 attorneys in the environmental crimes unit. So we need to increase that unit. But perhaps more importantly, we need to provide the Attorney General with the independent authority to bring environmental inspections, compliance, and enforcement actions that fall short of criminal violations. Right now, the Attorney General is brought into the case only if the Department of the Environment or the Department of Agriculture and perhaps the Department of Natural Resources brings the Attorney General in to bring that lawsuit because the client is the state. We've seen under Governor Hogan, we saw under Governor Ehrlich, a lack of interest in environmental enforcement. I'm going to work with the General Assembly to get that enforcement authority and to also on the policy side promote greater protections when it comes to environmental justice. New Jersey has a fantastic law. Before they issue any permits, discharge permits, either effluents or emissions, they require not only an analysis of whether you meet the federal and state standards for like particulate emissions, but does the cumulative effect overburden the surrounding community? And if it does, that permit can be rejected. In the Maryland Climate Solutions Now Act, with the General Assembly passed this year, they start moving in that direction, but they haven't moved far enough, fast enough. So as Attorney General, I'm going to be working with the General Assembly to get that passed. So environmental protection will be a top priority. Third, civil rights. Marylanders don't recognize, I think they don't, that the Attorney General does not have independent authority to bring most civil rights actions. You either bring them as a private citizen, as a plaintiff, or you go to the Maryland Civil Rights Commission. They're doing a good job, the Maryland Civil Rights Commission. They've been doing it for 50 years. They're advised by the Office of the Attorney General. I want to create the independent authority so we can take on things like, attacks on women's reproductive freedoms, on the LGBTQIA plus community. I'm a proud parent of a transgender son. I've been fighting on Capitol Hill for the last 6 years. First 4 years against Donald Trump when he banned transgender Americans from serving in our military. Probably the most vocal advocate in the Congressional Black Caucus for LGBTQIA plus rights. That will be a feature, a priority under a civil rights division that I established. And certainly hate crimes. Brian has set up a hate crimes task force. I want to expand that, but I also want to get authority to be able to bring hate crimes as standalone crimes. Most of those crimes are brought by states' attorneys, and I think that the Attorney General should have the authority in select cases to bring particularly high-profile cases to make a very clear statement that we do not tolerate hate crimes, whether it's race, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's your faith, ethnicity, race, orientation, hate crimes are not tolerated in Maryland. So those are three issues that will certainly be front and center, but the office is 700 people strong that covers a lot of different issues. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Okay, what are your thoughts on diversion for those with serious mental illnesses from the criminal justice system? And do you have any thoughts about effective programs that prevent violence with such individuals?
Sure, and as I did mention earlier, we need to be relying more on diversionary programs. I was talking about that in the context of juvenile justice system, but that's true in the adult courts as well. I was pleased to see that Maryland, and I was lieutenant governor when we established the first pilot programs for veterans courts. Veterans, many of whom suffer with PTSD and are in the criminal justice system. We've realized that we should better treat them with mental and behavioral health services, that diversionary type program, than incarcerating them. We should and can expand that to more and more people who are find themselves in the criminal justice system. But that's going to require a number of things. And let me outline just briefly that. First of all, we've got to put more money into the diversionary programs. And not only that, we need more mental and behavioral health providers. That's true in the criminal justice system. It's true in our schools. I know that Montgomery County high school students were recently surveyed, asked about their experiences and some of the things that they believe need to happen or change in schools. Number one on their list, these are young people who just gone through a pandemic, still recovering from a pandemic. Number one issue identified: more mental health services in our schools, both for students and for educators and education support personnel. So we know that we need more mental health services in the justice system, in our education system. We need more emergency mobile clinics in our communities, working side by side with law enforcement, sometimes depending on the crisis, working independently. But all of that is easier said than done, because what it's going to require is not only money, which I actually think Maryland has the resources, but we have to increase the number of mental and behavioral health providers. So we have to incentivize people to choose that as a career. I know there are a lot of critical shortages in many labor classifications, teachers and nurses, but certainly one of them is mental and behavioral health providers. So while someone might say, that's not the responsibility of the Attorney General, well, when it impacts law enforcement, when it impacts the quality of life in Maryland, that is a responsibility of the Attorney General. So as Maryland's a chief legal officer, I'll be advocating for programs to incentivize people to choose mental and behavioral health services as a chosen career or profession.
Okay, and the chat room just came on. I want to say this last question is my question. I received many incredible questions, so everything that you all sent in, I've been asking. The last question: compare and contrast your background experience to your opponent as to why you are the best candidate for Maryland's next Attorney General.
Let me start by saying that both of us have demonstrated commitment to public service. Judge O'Malley's 20 years on the district court, and before that as a assistant state's attorney in Baltimore County, is important, valuable, and commendable service. I believe that my background experience is stronger to lead the 700 men and women who make up the office of the Attorney General. You can view it as the largest public interest law firm in Maryland, 450 plus or minus lawyers, paralegals, investigators, support staff. I'm the only candidate, not only in the Democratic side, but even among the Republicans who are running, that has the executive experience to lead a large organization like that. When I was a colonel in the United States Army, I led a legal support organization of 80 lawyers and paralegals, counselors, investigators. We provided legal services to soldiers and their families, criminal defense, estate planning, consumer protection matters. And that's important because you have to have leadership experience. I also have leadership experience as lieutenant governor, establishing a budget, advocating for the reforms. Think about a lot of the questions that were asked today and the questions that I'm sure that you have asked in so many forums involving the attorneys general. So much of what Marylanders are looking for is a change in the law, the framework, the paradigm in which we're addressing the challenges, everything from the climate to criminal justice to disparities in healthcare. And that's not just about investigation, enforcement, and prosecution, which is important. It's about change in the law. Brian Frost was effective in Annapolis. The ban on ghost guns happened because Brian Frost showed up. Expanding access to women's reproductive health services and abortion services, and expanding the category of providers that can provide those services that happened this year. Brian Frost showed up and he testified. I know that because I was standing right next to him. The Attorney General will spend more time in a 90-day period in Annapolis every year testifying and advocating and influencing positive policy than the Attorney General ever will spend in a court. And yes, you are over 450 lawyers. I can assure you that every one of them have considerably more experience than any candidate who's running for Attorney General today. So I take my 30 years of legal experience, I couple it with my legislative advocacy experience in the House of Delegates, in Congress, working with constituents, working with diverse groups of stakeholders, meeting them where they are. And I couple that with my executive experience as lieutenant governor, running state government, and my executive experience as a colonel in the United States Army, managing legal professions. And I would then submit that while both of us have respectable careers in public service, that mine is at this point what is needed in the office of the Attorney General.
I want to thank you very much, Congressman Brown, for being with us today. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day down on Capitol Hill, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. And for that,
D18 and Susan, I hope you get better. Hope to see you soon at the diner. Take care.
Bye. Okay, Michael, if we could let Ms. O'Malley in now.
Judge O'Malley is in. I'm waiting for her to start her video.
Okay. At this point, as some of you may know, tonight there's a forum for the District Senate and House candidates sponsored by the District 18 caucus. Michael is going to put the link in the chat room for those of you who may be interested and have not signed up yet. There she is. Good morning.
Hi, Susan. Hope you're feeling better.
I'm not doing so good this morning, so you won't see me. First, I want to say that all of the questions were sent in by people who via at the process they linked in. There is one question that I ask that I made up, and I'm going to ask that first. Mr. Brown answered it last, so it's good to have the two of them together. It is compare and, first of all, we need you to do your intro. I apologize. So your introduction, Ms. O'Malley, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. My name is Katie Curran O'Malley, and I'd like to be your next Attorney General. I have been working in Maryland's legal system for the past 30 years. For the first 10, I was an assistant state's attorney in Baltimore County, where I handled every case ranging from misdemeanors, petty thefts, up to homicides, and in between there, dealing with violent crimes affecting children, domestic violence, drug trafficking cases, and human trafficking cases. Then for the past 20 years, I was happy and lucky enough to be appointed to the Baltimore City District Court, where I served for, again, 20 years, not just dealing with criminal matters, but also dealing with cases in our civil system, like housing disparities, landlord-tenant cases, negligence cases, contract disputes. But a big chunk of what I did during those 20 years was working also in our criminal system here in Baltimore City and in any other jurisdiction across the state that I was asked to sit, because I had jurisdiction to sit all across Maryland as a district court judge. And as a judge, I really concentrated on problem-solving issues like drug treatment court, where I served for 3 years, and truancy court, where I worked with kids on a volunteer basis for about 12 years trying to find solutions for them to get back into schools, working mainly in middle schools with parents and educators so that we could, again, really resolve the truancy issue, which was a big factor in kids not performing well in Baltimore City schools. And why that all matters with this 30 years of experience in our civil and criminal matters is that your next Attorney General will be leading over 400 lawyers that go into courtrooms just about every single day. Certainly, politics is an important aspect when you are an elected official, but I've been around politics all my life. I've worked with legislators when I was the First Lady of Maryland, dealing with issues of bullying against kids, getting laws passed to prevent cyberbullying against children, as well as working really hard behind the scenes to get marriage equality passed, which I was really happy to see happen back in 2012. So I'm no stranger when it comes to politics. I grew up in a house with a very political family, and then I ended up married to a politician. So I think the most important skill, though, with an attorney general is not the rule of politics, but the rule of law. This is about interpreting the laws, not just promoting good laws during 90-day sessions, but also working with the laws day in and day out and strategizing with the lawyers that I will be working with and leading. It's really, really important that you have that criminal experience as well as civil experience when knowing, how to go forward in a case, whether it's a jury trial or a court trial. I've tried hundreds of cases as a prosecutor in front of judges and juries, and then I've presided over thousands of cases. And don't let anybody fool you. Attorney generals really do the bulk of their work in the courtrooms. 40% of the work that's done in our courts of appeal, that's including the Court of Special Appeals and the Court of Appeals, are done by assistant attorney generals. They uphold all the convictions that happen across the state, and that's a lot of work that they do. The organized crime division right now is really, really busy because of the spike in violent crime. So you need an attorney general that understands how to strategize, go into court, and be there for the men and women that you're leading. Investigators as well. There's so many issues that are facing us now with gun violence, women's rights right now under attack because of the looming decision that we think is going to happen regarding Roe v. Wade. So you need a fighter that's actually been in the trenches, been in the courtrooms, and also knows how to deal with politicians. Again, I'm no stranger when it comes to our legislature and working with the men and women of our legislature during the 90-day session. So those are reasons why I am running. I am excited about the opportunity to be the first woman attorney general. Not that that makes me qualified being a woman, but I think it's an aspect that has been missing in a lot of our politics across our state here. We really need to have more representation. And I am really excited about this chance to talk with you this morning about the issues facing District 18.
Okay, next question. What is your approach to criminal justice reform?
Right now, I have seen, and first-handly, I have seen the problems in our criminal justice system. Some people say, when I'm sitting here, that the system's broken. It is not broken. It's a system that works, but it's not being used. It's not being, right in Baltimore City, we are not seeing enforcement at all. I don't think the answer for criminal justice reform is enforcement. I think it is making sure we have transparency and accountability in our policing. And in 2021, the legislature passed some very significant reforms when it comes to policing. First and foremost, the police now have to turn over, or jurisdictions have to turn over, any of these reports of police misconduct. And I've actually sat in court and had a police officer, 2 of them, lie to me under oath. And when I reported it, nothing I'm telling you was ever gotten back to me. I never heard whether they were reprimanded. I never heard anything. Then 2 years later, I found out they were removed from the office. But having transparency and accountability is really, really essential in having communities feel safe when they call the police. And I think that's been a huge problem here in Baltimore. And I know from talking to people across the state, that's an area that has been missing as well. So these police accountability boards will be up and running in July of 2022. Each jurisdiction by law, because of the reform bill that was passed in 2021, has to have that police accountability board set up. And as Attorney General, I would work with each jurisdiction. I've already been talking to many mayors and in municipalities. I was just at MML last night about how important it is to have that transparency, because citizens do need the police. We have seen that a violent spike in crime, or the spike in violent crime. We need the police, but we need to make sure they're being held accountable, just like everybody else in government is being held accountable. So that, I believe, from talking as well as to organizers with Campaign Zero, which is a big police reform nonprofit, we need to have transparency. And without that transparency, citizens won't feel safe. So I will be working very, very hard to make sure that those laws are enacted. Again, they started under Anton's law in 2021 with the police reforms.
Next question. As a follow-up to the mass rally in DC on Saturday, what are your plans to end gun violence, and what do you see as the next gun safety legislation?
So, you know, what we are seeing across our country and what we're seeing here in our own state is far too many firearms that are being illegally possessed. So first and foremost, illegal possession of firearms has to be enforced. First and foremost, we need to do that. On a larger scale, I just don't see why there is any need whatsoever to have automatic and semi-automatic weapons available in our country. And that being said, is probably an issue for Congress, which, you know, I don't see them, and I don't have a lot of faith in Congress doing anything about these firearms. What I do see here in Maryland, though, are remedies that we have done when it's come to other consumer protection actions, such as tobacco litigation, as well as the opioid crisis, when Attorney General Frosch went after the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma. I really believe that these firearm manufacturing companies, as well as the gun sellers, need to be held accountable. Right now, we have a federal law called the Protection of Lawful Commerce Against Arms Act, or for Arms Act, and that is called the PLCAA. That was established in 2005, and it gives a shielding to gun manufacturers and gun salespersons, gun shops. That needs to be eliminated. But before that can be eliminated, which will be a long time, because I know President Biden's working to get this done, but we all know what happens when it comes to the Senate passing any significant legislation. Right now, what we can do in states is go after these gun manufacturers in a consumer protection action, which I would like to see. It's similar to what Baltimore City just did about a week ago in suing Polymer 80, which is the ghost gun manufacturers from Nevada that are selling and targeting minors here in our state for ghost guns, even though they're illegal right now because the legislature passed that great law this session. We still have an abundance of those guns here in our city, in our state, and we really need to go after the gun manufacturers, I believe, and people who are not selling the guns pursuant to the law here in our state. So pursuing these types of actions on a consumer protection theory, as I think would be a really great way to start here, because you know, we going and enforcing is one thing, but really the true harm has been happening across our nation from the illegal, the sales of these legal sales of these automatic weapons that we have to put an end to.
Attorney General Brian Frosch worked with attorney generals from other states to advance collective suits to advance Maryland needs. Do you plan such joint efforts, and do you have any thoughts about what issues you might work in such a manner?
The guns, first and foremost, to follow up on that. I believe that's why the tobacco litigation was so successful. It started in Mississippi with Michael Moore, and then more and more states joined that, Florida, Maryland, so that became a very, very large amount of states that were going after the tobacco industry, which ended up in getting us a huge settlement against the tobacco industry, which Marylanders are still reaping the benefits of today. And that's what happened with the opioid suit against Sackler and Purdue Pharma. So I think it is smart to talk with other like-minded attorneys general across the nation when going after big issues such as consumer protection issues like the gun issue that we're facing here today, but also other issues like Facebook and big tech, because they are really unregulated and using a lot of our data in ways that we don't know. And so in an antitrust suit, I think we could follow up with other like-minded attorneys general to do those types of bigger cases, as well as, you know, when it comes to protecting a woman's right to choose. I know that Attorney General Frosch did enter into an amicus brief with the pending Mississippi case, Mississippi versus Dodds. So there's very many important issues that affect Marylanders that are also affecting people across our nation that I would want to join in with other like-minded attorneys general. Some of them are Republicans as well, especially when it comes to antitrust issues. There's there is so much that's happening in our world when it comes to inflation and price gouging issues, and making sure that the consumers are not being ripped off because of prices, not just at the gas tank that we're seeing now, but also in all types of consumer products across, the state. There's been a huge increase in prices, and making sure that those prices really reflect what the seller is having to face, so that we understand that we're all not getting ripped off. I think that's a huge area that we need to look into.
Okay. As you just stated a few minutes ago, you advocated for marriage equality when it was a priority for your husband, former Governor O'Malley. Did you take a position when your husband was the mayor of Baltimore and he implemented a zero tolerance policy strategy that resulted in the stop and frisk of 1 in every 6 Black men in Baltimore City?
No, I did not. The reason I got involved with marriage equality is I felt like that was an issue that was not partisan. I never participated in any of the administrations that my husband was either as mayor or as governor. When I participated in working towards marriage equality, that's something I've been doing probably before I even met my husband, quite frankly, in believing that, we're all the same and we should all have the same rights. So no, I was never a part of my husband's mayoral administration, nor was I part of his gubernatorial administration.
Okay, next question. What are your thoughts on diversion for those with serious mental illnesses from the criminal justice system? And along with that, are there any effective mental health programs that prevent violence that you are interested in?
So in Baltimore City, we have a mental health court, and that was a diversion court where people who were in fact suffering from mental illnesses could go and get the structure that they needed, with the judge, with the state's attorney, with the defense attorney, all agreeing on the treatment plan. And just like it was in drug treatment court, with our mental health court, we had a lot of overlap because many of our clients in the mental health court were also people who were suffering from drug addiction because they were self-medicating. So we found a really wonderful way of not calling them, again, defendants, but bringing them into the system as clients, working with them in inpatient and outpatient treatment for mental health, as well as oftentimes drug treatment, and getting them back on track with medication, getting them services they needed. Some of them were veterans, so we started a specific veterans treatment court in Baltimore City to address their specific needs, and certainly, get them streamlined into services with the VA so that we could make sure, after all the years of service that they had given us in our country, that they were getting the treatment they needed and that they deserved through the VA. So it was something that I felt very passionately about, because it was a way of problem solving, again, keeping people out of the system, getting them the treatment they needed, and then getting them their cases expunged so that they could go forward and get jobs and employment. So I found that those were very good ways of solving the issues when people who had mental illnesses came into the courts. We actually, when I lived in Baltimore, had someone come to our home and commit a crime, not inside, but outside our home, and they were suffering from a mental health issue. So when they were in fact arrested, they were treated in the mental health court and not treated, just as someone who was committing a crime, but really getting to the underlying issue of what was causing and driving that behavior so we could help them. And I truly believe that's the only way that we can help people with mental illnesses that get into the criminal justice system. Diversion was always something that we used and still use in Baltimore City, more so than many other jurisdictions.
This is an easy one. This is a softball. What's your top priority if elected Attorney General?
Well, it's two. First and foremost, we have an issue with violent crime that is like nothing I've ever seen before. We have such depravity of, action here, and we've seen it in the city, we've seen it across our state. And as I've gone across the state and talked to people, that's first and foremost on their minds. What are we going to do to save lives? We had to bury a 17-year-old boy in Baltimore in his prom suit just a few weeks ago. He went to his prom and he texted someone and said that was the best night of his life. And then at the after prom party, he was murdered and buried in his prom suit. So we really need to figure out how we can stop the bleeding here in our state and save lives. But at the same time, We have to make sure our criminal justice system is transparent and accountable. And those two things have to happen at the same time. We can do both. It's not one or the other. So I really believe when I talk to mothers and fathers and people across our state who have lost loved ones from gun violence and other violence, domestic violence is spiking. And that's an area that I know well too much about. That we have to find solutions to save lives. And that can be done in collaboration with the state's attorneys across our state. You know, there's so much in politics pointing fingers and saying, oh, it's the criminal justice system, it's broken, it's the judges, it's the prosecutors, it's this. We have to work together. We have to stop the blame and we have to start working collaboratively. And I know that's something that Attorney General Frosch started in 2015 with the Organized Crime Division. And the woman who leads that division has really built up trust across the state with the state's attorneys so that we can in fact work collaboratively. You know, crime doesn't just happen in one jurisdiction. Criminals go in and out all the time, especially with Baltimore City being the center around so many counties. You know, the criminal activity, whether it's carjacking or whether it's a murder case, goes from one jurisdiction to another, and having the ability to work with these other states' attorneys to collaborate and get all of the federal and local, law enforcement on the same page is a big push, but it has to be done in order for us to keep communities safe, as well as to keep the police transparent. We need a whole team there of people looking out and having oversight. So crime is a huge issue that we need to tackle now together, as well as our environment. You know, the window is closing, climate change is real, and we need to start doing more to enforce the many good environmental laws that we have on the books. There's so much that needs to be done, and the legislature just passed great legislation with Climate Solutions Now Act, and making sure that all of those steps are implemented would be a big part of what I would do. It's also increased. We right now only have about 1 or 2 AGs in the environmental crimes unit for the whole state. And I think we really need to have more working in that area so that we can make sure that we're going after the big and small environmental polluters.
Someone just posted a question, and that is, what are your thoughts about police in schools?
You know, that is one of the most difficult issues right now, because we're seeing what's happening in schools, and we're seeing just the tragedy that happened in Texas. You have the police officers there not going in. I've heard stories here in our state where police officers have been abusive and have actually been sort of a negative effect. So it's a double-edged sword, because a lot of times kids are having traumatic issues. When a police officer steps in, that can make it even more traumatic. I believe we need more mental health services and more social workers, really, when it comes to mental health issues with kids. There's not enough. Now, that's not to say that the social worker, and the mental health is going to stop any kind of violence happening in schools. So it's really something that I believe we need to talk to the educators and find out from them. Instead of politicians saying, this is what you need in your schools, I think we need to work with the educators to find out what they think is best when it comes to keeping their schools safe. Some say they want the SROs in there, and some say they don't. So it's a tough question, but I think first and foremost, we have to look at ways to keep our children safe, and also to keep an incident like the one that happened in Texas and Connecticut happening here anywhere in our country, but here in Maryland. You know, we have had a school shooting, you all know, in Montgomery County. There was a shooting at Magruder, and this is a serious issue. So making sure we talk with the educators and local jurisdictions about what they think their needs are and how we can accommodate them on a statewide level needs to be the conversation, because safety for our kids is a must. You can't learn if you don't feel safe. And I think the teachers and the educators have so much on them right now. When it comes to educating our kids, the fact that they are now worried about an incident like what happened in Texas is just mind-boggling, but we do have to worry about it. So just a long way of answering that is that I'm hearing from both sides the pros and cons. So we need to get together and discuss it and figure out what's best for our children.
You've talked about consumer protection, and one of the biggest needs is protection for seniors, whether it's over the phone, the internet. I personally have a cousin who passed away several years ago, and her husband was conned online and lost every single penny he owned. And he started selling things to make money, and instead of using it to pay bills, someone else conned him, and the family is taking away any ability he has to touch his money. But this is not a single occurrence. So what are your thoughts about seniors and protection?
Well, I have a history with this issue because when I was in the state's attorney's office, I was head of the white collar crime and the economic crimes fraud unit. And sadly, many of the victims that I dealt with were in fact seniors. And one was a huge case where there was a gentleman that came to one of the senior centers. He was an actor actually from Canada, so he was very handsome. And he was able to scam a bunch of the seniors there with a sort of sweepstakes fraud case. And fortunately, we were able to get that case resolved and prosecuted and get the refunds back for these people, these seniors. But you're right, seniors are targeted with robocalls and also things that appear on the internet. So if they're on the internet looking at their emails and they click on something, they can become victims of scams. There's probably thousands of people every day that are thinking of ways to rip off citizens through robocall and or for the internet issues. So we need to, first and foremost, we have to educate our people here in the state of Maryland on what not to do and what to do. And I know that Attorney General Frosch has a really good website for everyone, not just seniors. I'm fastly approaching being a senior, and I've been targeted plenty of times when robocalls for, whether it's the Verizon scam or car insurance. So education is imperative, but also having the consumer protection, their division has a 20, phone calls every day come in and people talk about issues that are facing them, cases where they've been scammed, and making sure that we are quick to getting the information that we can get from potential victims, because a lot of these scammers are from outside of our state and even outside of the country. So making sure that we're able to work collaboratively with the federal government and local law enforcement so that we can get the evidence quickly to proceed against people who are ripping off people every day when it comes to these types of scams, whether it's, a car insurance issue or whether it's a mortgage. There's just so many different types of scammers out there that it's important. And, there's different levels as well, like with structured settlements. There was a huge structured settlement scam that was going on and targeting kids who had gotten lead paint settlements. And the company brought these kids in and gave them pennies for what their settlement would have been, but it was cash up front. So they were advertising all across Baltimore because we had a big lead paint settlement. And these kids, as soon as they turned 18, the structured settlement industry under one company went after them and really took their money. And fortunately, it was investigated in the AG's office, and the AG's office was able not only to get them civilly, but also criminally indicted for what they did. So it's something that I'm really passionate about, to make sure that we're protecting not just our seniors, but also vulnerable citizens who are scammed every single day.
Okay, last question. This has gone fast. As we deal with environmental and climate change on a daily basis, with weather patterns changing around the world and Tangier Island is disappearing, what are your thoughts about what you might be able to do as Attorney General?
Well, again, the bill that was just passed, Climate Solutions Now, sort of expands what was passed back in 2007 or 2008 under the previous Governor O'Malley. And it looks at where we are going with fossil fuels, making sure that we take the school bus fleet now for public schools and make it electric, making sure that buildings that are over 35,000 square feet that are being built are all going to be on an electric grid. That's really important. But also, I think when it comes to the Attorney General's office, giving the Attorney General the power to go after fossil fuel companies who have directly affected climate here in our state. It's a law that was passed in Delaware, and the Delaware Attorney General has sued 31 fossil fuel companies in Delaware for their knowingly not disclosing the effects of fossil fuels on the climate. And I think that was a bill that was presented in the last session, but it didn't get out of committee. I would like to see our Attorney General have the power to go after fossil fuel companies that have done that same type of deceptive practices in Delaware that they've done here in Maryland, so that we can really go and get money to pay for all of the damages that have been caused. I mean, we've had, historical flooding 2 years in a row in Ellicott City. We're seeing tornadoes here in Maryland, which is definitely not a common, weather trend for the East Coast. We're seeing, and the violent effects of these weathers are disproportionately affecting, I think, our communities of low income and certainly our big cities like Baltimore. And so I think it's important that we have more tools in the box to go after, these big violators, so that we can start working on getting our energy system changed into more of an electric grid so that it's cleaner, using the wind power legislation that was passed, I believe, in 2013, so that we can continue to use wind power and solar power. These are all things that I think are going to move us towards cleaner energy, and more so the negative effects of climate change will be thwarted, because like I said earlier, we have a very narrow window of addressing this issue, and we've known about it for a long time. So it's time that we now act with the laws that we have on the book, so that we can start making, our generations to come have a clean environment, clean water, clean air, clean land.
Thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. And I want to remind everybody that on Friday, July 15th, Senator Chris Van Hollen will be joining us at the Silver Spring Tasty Diner at 7:30 in person. So, Ms. O'Malley, if you're in Silver Spring, drop by that morning. And everybody else, I hope to see you there. Thank you all very much. Have a lovely day. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Take
Bye.
care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.